Spider Basics Beyond the Eight Legs.
Hello YouTube. Welcome to episode 4 of Spider Basics Beyond the Eight Legs, Classification and the Identification Process. This is a thing I wish I had understood much earlier in my spidering days as a kid. Now I get that talking about how spiders are classified, described, and organized into groups with specific names doesn't sound that interesting at first. So why should you care about it? Classifying things and naming them allows us to talk about them with each other and understand what we each mean. And definitions matter. Some endangered bumblebees in California are only protected by law now because someone successfully argued in court that they meet the state's definition of fish. But if you're the average person interested in spiders, perhaps the most important reason to care about how spiders are classified in different groups is that it's actually key to learning to identify them. That was a taxonomy joke and it was very funny. Maybe you'll get it later. Google is amazing. It gives us an incredibly fast and easy way to get a totally incorrect identification. And with over 50,000 known species of spider today, simply trying to match a specimen to a photo on the internet is a much slower, more painful way to also get an incorrect ID. A lot of spiders can't actually be identified to the species level without actually dissecting them and looking at parts under a microscope. And to the beginner especially, who might not know what features to look for, it's very easy to mistake one spider for another. Hence, half the Western world thinks that every brownish thing with 8 legs is a brown recluse. In reality, identifying spiders is a process of starting with broad categories, then figuring out what smaller category within the bigger category the spider belongs to. And understanding these categories gives us a path to go down to arrive at the right identification, and also shows us just how much variety there is among spiders. Also, it turns out that the world of classifying and naming things is fraught with human drama. More on that in a bit. Just before I get right into it, I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Sean McCann, Dr. Catherine Scott, Dr. Sebastian Echeverry, Spencer Hoffman, Nancy Miarelli for their help with this video. They really cleared up some things that were pretty muddy to me and helped make this one happen in various ways, so thank you. Classifying things can get complicated because there's always more than one way to do it, depending on why you're doing it in the first place. So we have terms like taxonomy, phylogeny, systematics, and cladistics. I'm going to focus on taxonomy, which is essentially the study of identifying, describing, classifying, and naming organisms. And for that, we refer to the Linnaean system of classification for organisms. Any living thing can be classified in this system. It has 8 main levels: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, each one getting more and more specific. Let's look at an example like this goldenrod crab spider here. Its cells have a defined nucleus, so it belongs in the domain Eukaryota, and it's an animal as opposed to a plant or a fungus, so it's in the kingdom Animalia. It has no backbone, but instead has an exoskeleton, jointed limbs, and a segmented body, so it's in the phylum Arthropoda. It's got 8 legs, chelicerae, and pedipalps, so that puts it in the class Arachnida. Insects, by the way, with 6 legs and wings belong to the class Insecta. It has 2 main body segments, produces venom and silk, and uses its pedipalps in reproduction, putting it in the order Araneae. And the order Araneae is spiders. Now, most of us can sort of instinctively get this far. We can see a spider and recognize, hey, I know what that is. That's a spider. If you're here, though, you want to go further than that. In this case, it belongs to the suborder Araneomorphae, or true spiders, because its fangs oppose each other instead of being parallel, and the family Thomisidae because of its eye arrangement, the first pair of legs being the longest, and the front 2 pairs of legs being particularly thick and strong. Even I couldn't tell you what puts it in the Misomena genus and the Vatia species, but that's what it is. Notice how we went from broad groups to more and more specific ones, one step at a time. What we didn't do was go straight from, that's a spider of some kind, to, oh, that's Misumena vatia, in one step. Also, when we say Misumena vatia, we're using the Latin name, or scientific name, sometimes called the binomial, which is actually just the genus and the species slapped together, usually in Latin, sometimes Greek, sometimes other words or names. The fun thing about these is that they kind of sound like magic spells, so a bunch of nerds listing their favorite species sounds a bit like a wizard battle.
Crotalus adamantius. Scolopendra hero! Ah!
Micropletus demolitor!
When I refer to this brat of a spider who never weaves her web where I want her to and always ends up in very inconvenient places in my office as Argiope aurantia, what I'm actually saying is the genus, Argiope, and the species within that genus, Aurantia. Other species within the same genus are Argiope bruennicae and Argiope trifasciata. And in written language, once the species has been written out with the binomial once, so that we know what we're talking about, the genus is often abbreviated to an initial, so A. aurantia. Also, when written, these binomial names are always italicized with the genus capitalized and the species all lowercase. This is actually taken quite seriously, by the way, and if you get lazy and don't follow these rules in an academic setting, you will get some fingers wagged at you. Take a wild guess how I know that. As you can see from the example I just gave, these three spiders in the same genus, Argiope, are pretty similar to each other, which follows, as genus is the second last level of classification. You can get an idea what the degree of similarity is at each level. I asked Dr. Sean McCann, an arachnologist in Newfoundland, if there were clear definitions regarding what level of similarity defined an order, or a family, or a genus. When he finished laughing, he explained that scientists argued about this stuff all the time. And in fact, there's a very old conflict in taxonomy known as the splitters versus lumpers rivalry that goes all the way back to Charles Darwin's day. For the splitters, each housefly you see is its own unique species, and for the lumpers, everything with wings is the same species. I am, of course, being ridiculous, but that's the concept, and how finely things are split is often determined by how much they've been studied. Now, of course, there needs to be some kind of agreement on how we name and classify things, right? Well, there's a body known as the ICZN, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, and they have a set of rules known as the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, the ICZN. Whatever. The code states that anyone can name a new species or genus, so long as the new name is published in a permanent, duplicable form that's available to others, the name is clearly stated and follows the Linnaean binomial format, and is based on a type specimen, a preserved physical specimen of the animal. What's weird is that some of the standards we would normally expect to be part of publishing, like for instance, peer review, where other scientists read over your work and see if it checks out, are not actually required by the code. This leaves open the potential for the nerdiest sounding offense I've ever heard of: taxonomic vandalism. A name that has become synonymous with taxonomic vandalism is Raymond Hoser, an Australian amateur herpetologist. Now, amateurs have produced first-rate work in biology, but that doesn't seem to be the case with this guy. In a 12-year period, 76% of all the new reptile genera and subgenera created worldwide were his, most of them named after himself, his family members, or his dogs. The trouble is, he published the papers describing these new genera or species in his own self-published scientific journal, the Australasian Journal of Herpetology, which underwent no peer review or any kind of real scientific scrutiny from anyone other than himself, and often included rants against other scientists, other science journals, wildlife officials, and even judges in courts of law. And other herpetologists found his taxonomic revisions and new genera and species to be problematic, sometimes entirely wrong, often just a rehashing of other people's work, and the names he came up with to immortalize his friends and family and pets were deeply unpopular with scientists. But he printed his journal on paper and mailed it to libraries, so it qualified, albeit barely, as a permanent and available publication under the ICZN rules, and there was nothing anybody could really do about it other than writing another paper with another revision and going to the trouble of publishing that in another journal, which is a ton of work that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. This is taxonomic vandalism. It's the nerd equivalent of spray painting bad words on the side of City Hall just so someone else has to go to the trouble of cleaning it up. Who knew taxonomy could be so dramatic? Turns out it always has been. Back in 1737, Carl Linnaeus, who basically invented and standardized our system of naming organisms, named what he regarded as an insignificant weed after a contemporary of his that he didn't really get along with so well. Nearly 300 years later, that annoying, bad-smelling weed is still named after that guy.
I will eviscerate you in fiction. Every last pimple, every last character flaw.
Science burn! Getting back to spiders, recall that spiders are all the creatures in the order Araneae. Under order is family, and there are currently 136 recognized families of spiders. Families have traits that are fairly consistent within their members. For instance, the eye arrangement. The Lycosidae family, the wolf spiders, have eyes arranged like this, while the Celticidae family, the jumping spiders, have them arranged like this. But then here's a spider from the Clubionidae family, and one from the Agellenidae family. They're pretty much the same, so a lot of families don't have differences between them that are really obvious visually. This is just fine if you already know what spider you're dealing with. But if you've got an unknown spider in front of you that you're trying to identify, it would be helpful to be able to narrow down the number of possible families it could be using other observable information, so that instead of knowing it could belong to any of the 136, it might be in one of just 20 families. For that, a more recent development has been to group the families themselves into divisions called guilds. Guilds aren't a classification level in the traditional system. They're sort of an informal grouping, and the idea has been around since the 1950s or so, but it seems to have really solidified for spiders in 2011, when Pedro Cardoso et al. Refined it somewhat. The idea of a guild is basically, how does this spider make a living? So while classes, orders, families, etc. are largely determined by morphology, the physical description of an animal, guilds were defined by how the spider hunts and lives. 8 guilds were arrived at, which is a small enough number to function as a starting point for narrowing down spiders. So when it comes to identifying spiders you might find in the field, this is where you start. Each guild will contain several families, and most of the spiders in those families will live more or less the same kind of lifestyle. Let's look at the 8 guilds. The sensing web weavers lay silk on the ground, usually around a retreat, and use those silk lines to detect prey, but the silk does not capture or ensnare the prey. This will include purseweb spiders, trapdoor spiders, southern house spiders, and tarantulas. The sheet web weavers make a horizontal sheet of silk that often includes a funnel-like retreat, and this sheet does play a role in ensnaring prey. This guild includes grass spiders, giant house spiders, and barn funnel weavers, and linyphiids, sometimes called money spiders. The space web weavers build webs that occupy 3-dimensional spaces, what many would call cobwebs. This guild includes the widows and false widows, cellar spiders, and other cobweb weavers. The orb web weavers make what we call orb webs, the classic design that comes to mind when we think of a spider web. Yellow garden spiders, gray cross spiders, and even the Joro spider all fall into this guild, and it also includes some unique ones like cave-dwelling and long-jawed orb weavers, and the one family of spiders that does not possess venom glands, the Ulyborids. The ambush hunters are sit-and-wait predators that don't use a web, at least not in a conventional sense. Recluses and crab spiders are in this guild, and they pretty much sit and wait for stuff to come to them. But this guild also includes the Dionopids, the net-casting spiders, which also sit and wait for something to get close, but then basically throw a web at them. They're pretty cool. The ground-active hunters are one of the more athletic guilds, with the spiders usually running along the ground and chasing down prey, without the use of a web. Wolf spiders, the Lycosidae family, are probably the best known members of this guild, but it also includes the stealthy ground spiders, like the eastern parson, some ant mimic spiders, and depending on who you talk to, the woodlouse hunters. The other active hunters stalk and pursue their prey in places other than on the ground, again, without using a capture web. Jumping spiders, the darlings of the internet, belong to this guild, along with a lot of other spider families that get considerably less love, such as the Pisaurids, which include fishing spiders, or dock spiders as they're sometimes called, some of which hunt on the surface of water. Caracantheidae and Clibionidae, the sac spiders, which you'll find hunting in vegetation and on ceilings and walls. Lynx spiders, which are super cool, running crab spiders, and others. Then that brings us to the specialists. Now, Cardoso's specialist guild sort of includes all families that specialize on any one given type of prey, while others consider spider hunting specialists, spiders who hunt other spiders. And it's not that one's necessarily right or wrong, it sort of depends on your purpose in using guilds. For identification, we'll go with the Spider Hunting Specialists Guild. Of course, humanity has its eccentrics, and so do spiders. If you came across Argyroneta aquatica, the diving bell spider, which lives its entire life underwater in a little silk retreat, you would never guess that it actually belongs to the Dictinidae family, the mesh weavers, which are typically considered to be in the Space Web Weaver Guild, the spiders that make cobwebs. So there are some exceptions. For the most part, though, if you can figure out what guild a spider belongs to based on what you're seeing, if it's in a web, what kind of web, if it's actively hunting, how is it hunting, that will narrow your ID down to a very manageable group of families. This is how some newer spider field guides are laid out, and I'm going to talk about two of them. This one, Spiders of the United States and Canada, by Dr. Sebastian Echeverri, nails a particular role in the spider book world. First, it's really small. It's coil bound, and it's made of really tough, durable pages. This book is made to be thrown in your backpack or even your pocket when you're going on a walk or a hike, so it's very handy and portable. And it's a really great introduction to this concept of guilds and families without being overwhelming to the beginner. It lists over 150 of the most common species in the US and Canada, and even if you can't find the exact spider you're looking at in the book, it will most likely enable you to figure out at least what guild and maybe what family the spider is in. And that's a really important step for someone just starting out in spidering. And when I talked to Sebastian at the IECC conference this summer, he addressed that.
My goal when I wrote it in terms of helping people with IDs is if I can take someone who previously would be like, I don't know what that is, and get them to the point of saying, oh, I know, that is a orb weaver, or that is a wolf spider. That's a huge win for me.
So this is an excellent tool for the beginner. It's a lot of information in a small and very durable package. The photography throughout is fantastic, and it runs at $9.95 US. This one just came out a few months ago. I'll put a link in the description about where you can get it. Then we have this one. This is Sarah Rose's Spiders of North America, and you'll notice right away that this book is a lot bigger. I've talked about it before, but now that you understand the concept of guilds, it merits a bit more discussion. Now, this one is laid out in much the same way, with over 550 species grouped by the same set of guilds. But then Sarah gives you a tool we haven't discussed yet, dichotomous keys. A dichotomous key is a series of questions that functions almost identically to a choose-your-own-adventure novel. If you're old like me, you need no further explanation. But if you're not, I'll have to walk you through what I mean by that. When you open up the book to a guild, the first thing listed is a series of numbered pairs of statements. Whichever of the two best describes what you're looking at tells you which pair of statements to go to next. So, in Ground Active Hunters, the first couplet asks you whether your mystery spider has 6 eyes in a cluster or 8 eyes. If it's 6, you go to couplet number 2, which then asks you about the shape of the chelicerae, and based on your answer there, it tells you which of 2 spider families your specimen belongs to. If it has 8 eyes, you go to couplet number 3, which asks you about the shape and arrangement of the eyes, and the answer there directs you either to a family or another couplet. Eventually, as you work your way through the couplets, you'll end up at a certain spider family, and then you can flip to that family in the book, and that's when you start trying to match to photos. But at that point, you've narrowed down the possibilities dramatically, because the key let you zero in on the family. So this is known as a key to family. Scientists use these keys all the time, and within families, there are keys to genus. Within a genus, there might exist a key to species. The book also provides sections on anatomy, techniques for collecting spiders, and other stuff. The photography is excellent and really helpful. Obviously, this one costs a bit more, but it's also worth every penny. And I've got an Amazon affiliate link in the description. I do make a small commission off this one if you order through the link. Both of these are really useful tools. This one's great for your pocket and good for a beginner. This one will probably stay at home, but goes into considerably more depth. But both will get you going in identifying spiders and understanding the classifications and the different taxonomical levels like family, genus, and species. Now, even with them, you can certainly still make a mistake. Maybe you figure out the guild and the family and even genus, but you get the species wrong. Sure, you'll be wrong, but you'll only be a little wrong, as opposed to a lot wrong if you had just tried to match the spider up to one of 50,000 species pictures. And less wronger is more better. People just blindly scouring pictures on the internet is how this southern house spider in the Philostatidae family gets mistaken for a brown recluse in the Sicariidae family. This is also a good way to learn to accept that sometimes you can't get to species, which none of us like when we start out. We always want to know for sure what a spider is. But even in books written by experts, you'll often see photos labeled like Habronatus sp. That means it's some species in the Habronatus genus, but we don't know which one. And believe it or not, among themselves, arachnologists actually say it out loud like that. Sp. And that, my friends, is my introduction for you to the world of spider taxonomy, how spiders are classified, and how that classification helps us in identifying them. And what I've found is that after a while, and with some practice, you find yourself looking at a spider and just knowing, oh, that's some kind of Nephosid, or looks like something in the Araneus genus to me. A great way to do this is to join some of the spider identification groups on Facebook and try to narrow down the spider someone is asking about before reading the comments from the experienced folks, and see how close you can get. And keep in mind that the goal isn't really to land on exactly the right species, but to see how far down the taxonomical tree you can get. Did you figure out just the guild, or did you manage to get to family? I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Spider Basics. If you did, or found it helpful, leave me a comment, click like, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Click the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. And a big thank you to my patrons, who really help keep this channel going. Patreon is one of the best ways to support my channel if you like what I'm doing, and you get extra behind-the-scenes stuff there. Like the ongoing saga of this Argiope who refuses to cooperate with me and is insisting on weaving her web anywhere but in the frame I want her to weave it in. I really appreciate everyone who has supported me over on Patreon. Thank you so much, folks. And check out the Shopify store to get yourself one of these, or any of the other merch there. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time on Spider Basics Beyond the 8 Legs. Cheers.